Welcome to quicktechie.com. Let's continue with Palo Alto Networks, Network Security Analyst Certification Training next module.
External Dynamic Lists, EDLs. Overview. Let's talk about External Dynamic Lists, EDLs. Overview. Imagine you have a list of bad websites or dangerous computer addresses, IP addresses, that you want your firewall to block. Hackers create new bad sites and use different addresses all the time. If you had to manually type these lists into your firewall every time they change, it would be a huge amount of work and your firewall would quickly become out of date, missing new threats. The purpose of External Dynamic Lists, EDLs, is to solve this problem. An EDL tells your Palo Alto Networks firewall to automatically import and update lists of information from a web server somewhere on the internet, or even on your internal network. These lists can contain IP addresses, URLs, website addresses, or domains, like google.com. The place where the list is stored is just a simple text file on a web server. For example, a security company might publish a list of currently active malicious IP addresses on their website as a text file. Your firewall can be configured to go to that specific web address, download the latest version of the list, and update its own copy automatically. The main benefit of using EDLs is that they keep your security policy and profiles current. Your firewall always has the latest information without you having to manually make changes. This is great for latest threat intelligence, automatically blocking IPs or URLs known to be used by current attacks. Controlled access lists, automatically updating lists of allowed or blocked users, partners, or cloud service addresses without manual firewall configuration changes. It makes the firewall's security rules dynamic, meaning they can change and update themselves based on external information, keeping your network focused on the benefit of using external dynamic lists, EDLs. The biggest advantage of using EDLs is that they help you keep your security policy and profiles current automatically. Think about traditional security. If there's a new list of 100 bad IP addresses you need to block, a network administrator would have to 1. Get the list, maybe in an email. 2. Log into the firewall. 3. Go to the objects section. 4. Create a new address group or add each IP one by one. 5. Go to the security policy rule. 6. Add the new IPs or group to the block rule. 7. Commit the changes, which can sometimes disrupt network traffic. If this list changes every hour, doing this manually is impossible. Your firewall's protection would always be behind the latest threats. With EDLs, you do the initial setup once. You tell the firewall where the list is located on a web server and how often to check for updates, for example, every hour. Then, the firewall does all the work. 1. It connects to the web server on the schedule you set. 2. It downloads the latest version of the list. 3. It automatically updates the list object inside the firewall. 4. The security policy rules or profiles that use the EDL immediately start using the new, updated list. So, the main benefit is automation and speed. Your firewall is constantly updated with the latest threat intelligence from external sources. If a security vendor identifies 1,000 new malicious websites, your firewall can start blocking them within the hour, or whatever schedule you set, without any manual action from you. This also makes managing controlled access lists easier. If you have a list of partner company IP addresses that changes frequently, you can host that list on an internal web server, use an EDL to import it, and the policy rule allowing access from partners stays correct even as their IP addresses change. In simple terms, EDLs save you a lot of manual work and make your firewall's security measures much more effective by keeping them up to date with rapidly changing information. EDL object creation. Alright, let's focus on EDL object creation. This is the first step you take on the Palo Alto Networks firewall to set up an external dynamic list. You are basically creating an entry or definition for the list that the firewall needs to know about. Think of it like adding a contact to your phone. You give it a name and tell it how to find the contact, their phone number. When you create an EDL object, you need to tell the firewall three main things. 1. Specify the source URL pointing to the list file. This is the web address, like http:// or https:// where the firewall can find the list itself. This URL must lead directly to a simple text file that contains the list of IP addresses, URLs, or domains. For example, a URL might look like http://threadfeeds.example.com/blocklist.txt. The firewall will go to this specific address to download the list. 2. Define the list type, IP list, URL list, or domain list. You must tell the firewall what kind of information is in the text file at that URL. Is it a list of IP addresses, like 1.1.1.1 or 192.168.1.024? Is it a list of full website URLs, like http://maliciousSite.com/badpage? Or is it just a list of domain names, like badsite.com? You choose one of these types when creating the object. This helps the firewall understand how to read and use the information in the list correctly. 3. Configure update schedule. For example, hourly, daily. This tells the firewall how often it should check the source URL for a newer version of the list. Since these lists, especially threat intelligence feeds, change often, you want the firewall to get updates regularly. You can set the firewall to check for updates every hour, every day, every week, or at a specific time. Choosing a frequent schedule, like hourly, ensures your firewall has the most current information to protect your network. By completing these steps, you create the EDL object on the firewall. This object is now ready to be used in your security rules or profiles. It's the blueprint that tells the firewall where to get the list, what kind of list it is, and how often to refresh it. Specify the source URL pointing to the list file. Let's look closer at specify the source URL pointing to the list file. This is arguably the most important piece of information you provide when creating an EDL object. It's like giving the firewall the exact address where it needs to go to find the list of data. The source URL is a standard web address, starting with http:// or https://. It needs to point directly to a text file hosted on a web server. This text file is where the list of IP addresses, URLs, or domains is stored. For example, a URL could be http://downloads.securityvendor.com/block_trips.txt. This URL points to a file named block_trips.txt on the server downloads.securityvendor.com. https://myinternalserver/access_list/allowed_users.csv. This URL points to a file on an internal server. The firewall will use this exact URL to download the file periodically based on the update schedule you set. The text file format is usually very simple, just a list of the items, IPs, URLs, or domains, one per line. It's crucial that the URL is correct and accessible by the firewall. The firewall needs to be able to reach the web server over HTTP or HTTPS. The file at the URL contains the correct type of data you specified, IPs, URLs, or domains, in a format the firewall can read, usually just a list, one item per line. If the URL is wrong, or the firewall cannot reach it, or the file format is incorrect, the EDL won't be able to update, and your security will not be current. So, providing the exact, correct URL is the foundation of setting up an EDL. Define the list type. Let's talk about define the list type when creating an EDL. This is another essential setting. After you tell the firewall where to get the list, the URL, you must tell it what kind of information is contained within that list file. The firewall needs this information so it knows how to read the file correctly and how to use the data in your security rules and profiles. There are three main types you can define for an EDL. 1. IP list. This means the text file at the source URL contains a list of IP addresses or IP address ranges, like 192.168.1.1 or 10.0.0.08. Each IP address or range is typically on a new line in the file. The firewall will read these and understand them as network addresses. This type of list is often used in the source or destination fields of security policy rules to block or allow traffic to, from specific malicious or trusted IP addresses. 2. URL list. This means the text file contains a list of full website addresses, URLs, including the http:// or https:// path and possibly paths or specific pages, like http://phishingsite.com/login or https://malwaresource.net/virus.x. Each URL is on a new line. This type of list is typically used within a URL filtering security profile to block access to specific bad websites or pages that might not be covered by standard URL categories yet. 3. Domain list. This means the text file contains just the domain names, like badasite.com or malicious.org. This is simpler than a full URL list as it doesn't include the protocol or specific page paths. Each domain is on a new line. Domain lists can be used in security policy rules or within URL filtering profiles, often blocking access to any part of a specific malicious domain. Choosing the correct type is critical. If you tell the firewall it's an IP list, but the file contains URLs, the firewall won't be able to read it correctly, and the EDL won't work. You select the type that matches the data format of the text file at your source URL. Configure update schedule. Let's talk about configure update schedule when you are creating an external dynamic list. After you tell the firewall where the list is, the source URL, and what kind of information is in it, IP, URL, or domain list, you need to tell it how often it should go and check that URL for updates. This is the update schedule. Think of the firewall like a person who needs to check a newspaper for the latest news. You tell them which newspaper to read, the URL, and what kind of news to look for, the list type. Now, you need to tell them how often to get the newspaper, every hour? Once a day? The list of bad IPs or URLs on the web server can change very quickly, especially with new attacks happening constantly. If your firewall only downloads the list once a week, it will be blind to all the new threats that appeared during that week. So, you configure update schedule to tell the firewall to automatically connect to the source URL and download the latest version of the list at regular times. Common schedule options include hourly. The firewall checks the URL every hour. This is good for very active threat intelligence feeds. Daily. The firewall checks once a day. This might be okay for lists that don't change as often. Weekly, checking once a week. This is usually too slow for threat lists but might be fine for static lists that rarely change. Specific time. You can set a precise time for the update to happen. Choosing the right schedule depends on how often the list at the source URL is updated. For fast-changing threat lists, hourly is often preferred to make sure your firewall is always using the most current information to protect your network. This automated update is a key benefit of EDLs. It keeps your security up to date without manual work. Applying EDLs. Now let's talk about applying EDLs. You have created your EDL object, telling the firewall where to find the list of IPs, URLs, or domains and how often to update it. But just creating the object isn't enough. You need to tell the firewall how to use this list to protect your network. This is the application step. You apply EDLs by referencing them in your security configurations. There are two main places you will use them. 1. Use EDLs directly in security policy rules. Security policy rules control which traffic is allowed or denied based on source, destination, application, etc. If your EDL is an IP list or a domain list, you can use it in the source or destination fields of a security policy rule. For example, you can create a rule that says, block all traffic where the destination is in the malicious IP addresses EDL. Or, allow traffic where the source is in the trusted partner I.P.EDL. When traffic comes through, the firewall checks if the source or destination IP/domain is on the current list from your EDL object and applies the policy action, block or allow. 2. Reference EDLs within security profiles. EDLs containing URL lists or domain lists are commonly used inside a URL filtering security profile. Remember, security profiles inspect traffic for threats after a policy rule allows it. In a URL filtering profile, you can add your URL or domain EDL to the list of sites that should be blocked, allowed, or alerted on. For instance, you might have a URL filtering profile that blocks common bad website categories. You can add your current phishing URLs EDL to this profile's blocked list. Now, anytime the firewall inspects web traffic using this URL filtering profile, it will block connections to any URL or domain on your dynamic list, even if they aren't in the standard categories yet. In essence, applying an EDL is like linking your constantly updated list to the places in your firewall's configuration that make access decisions or perform inspections. Use EDLs directly in security policy rules. Let's talk about use EDLs directly in security policy rules. Security policy rules are like the main traffic cops of your firewall. They look at network traffic and decide if it's allowed to go from one place to another. These rules check things like where the traffic is coming from, source, where it's going to, destination, and what kind of communication it is, application. When you create a security policy rule, you normally specify individual IP addresses, address groups, or zones for the source and destination. With an EDL that is configured as an IP list or a domain list, you can use the name of your EDL object directly in the source or destination fields of a security policy rule. Think of your EDL object, like malicious_IPs or trusted_partners, as a special address group that gets its members updated automatically. Here's how you use it. You create a security policy rule. In the source field, instead of selecting a specific zone or single IP, you can select your EDL object, if it's an IP or domain list, to mean any traffic coming from an IP address or domain that is currently in this EDL list. Or, in the destination field, you can select your EDL object, if it's an IP or domain list, to mean any traffic going to an IP address or domain that is currently in this EDL list. Then you set the action for the rule, usually deny to block traffic to, from a bad list, or allow for a trusted list. Example. You have an EDL named latest_malware_IPs that downloads a list of dangerous IP addresses every hour. You create a security policy rule. Source zone, any. Destination zone, any. Destination address, select the EDL object latest_malware_IPs. Application, any. Action, deny. Now, any traffic trying to go to any IP address on that constantly updated latest_malware_IPs list will be automatically blocked by this policy rule. You don't have to manually add or remove IPs from the rule. The EDL object handles the updates. This is a very powerful way to quickly enforce policy based on dynamic lists of IPs or domains. Reference EDLs within security profiles. Let's talk about reference EDLs within security profiles. You know that security policy rules decide if traffic is allowed or not. If traffic is allowed by a policy rule, it then goes through further security inspections using security profiles, like antivirus, anti-spyware, vulnerability protection, and URL filtering. An EDL that is configured as a URL list or a domain list is often used inside a URL filtering security profile. When you configure a URL filtering profile, you usually set actions, like allow, block, alert, for different categories of websites, like social networking, gambling, malware. Besides these built-in categories, the profile also lets you add specific URLs or domains that you want to treat differently. This is where you reference EDLs within security profiles. In the configuration of the URL filtering profile, you can select the name of your URL list or domain list EDL object and add it to a custom list of sites that the profile should check against. For example, you have a URL filtering profile called employee internet filter. You can add your EDL object named daily_phishing_URLs, which is a URL list EDL, to the block list within this employee internet filter profile. Now, when the firewall inspects web traffic using the employee internet filter profile, 1. It checks the URL against the standard URL categories. 2. It also checks the URL against the URLs currently in your daily_phishing_URLs EDL. If the URL matches either a blocked category or a URL in your EDL, the firewall will take the specified action, in this example, block. This is beneficial because it combines the broad protection of URL categories with the very specific and frequently updated protection from threat intelligence lists provided by your EDLs, all within a single security inspection profile.